Today's scripture lesson is taken from Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4. And once again, I'm sure it's a verse which probably all of us here have heard of. And it goes like this. Ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. Let's look at that today and see what advice God has for us dads or dads-to-be or guys who have influence over children, and we'll learn from it. I have a few tools up here. I'm sure if I show them to you all, you'll know what they are. I use these quite a bit in my former profession. I'm a retired technician, and wire cutters. So you all probably know what they're for. And of course, you probably know what this is here. Yeah, they really have to open it up, but you know what that's for, right guys? Yeah. I'm sure your wives know what this for too. She's probably told you to break it out several times to stay in the deck. And of course, got one of these, screwdriver, right? You all know what that's about, what it's for. And what toolbox would be complete without one of these? As a matter of fact, often this takes the place of this and this. I've seen guys use this for a chisel, and I've seen guys cut through wire with a hammer when they didn't have their cutters. Bang it about 50 times and you break it off. So anyway, you get the idea that placed in the hands of the right person, these tools can produce works of beauty, works of functionality, works that are of value. Or placed in unskilled hands, they could do quite a bit of damage. I remember when I was a young child, I got a handy dandy tool set for my birthday or Christmas. And back in those days, they didn't have plastic tools; they had actual tools. This was a tool which had a pair of pliers in it, and it had a saw with metal teeth on it. And I got that thing, and that saw was amazing. It was fascinating. And I went over, and my mom had a mahogany coffee table, and I started hacking through the one leg on that, and oh my gosh, she screamed and yelled, and well, you get the idea. Tools in the hands of an unskilled person can create some damage. Thankfully, she stopped it before it did too much damage, and I think Dad filled it in with something. And when we broke up the house after Mom passed away, and that went one place and the other place, I remember looking at that thing and saying, I know there's damage there, and I did it. And not that I'm proud of it, but it just proves the point that tools in the wrong hands can create some problems. Well, children are not tools, but they are placed in our hands, and it would be beneficial for us to have some tools to know what to do with them. And so we have our Bible. The Bible which teaches us many things about children. And today I'd like to touch upon some of those tools which you guys and I will benefit from using when it comes to dealing with our children. Now, the first point I want to mention is that in Ephesians chapter 6, we find the verse that says, to bring up children in the ways of the Lord, in discipline, encourage, and comfort, and instructing them. And too often, we have focused upon the word discipline. And that becomes the primary function of the dad in the family. I remember my mom once screaming at my dad right as he walked in the door after coming home from work and saying, you know what these kids did today? And blah, 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 blah. And Dad said, oh, wait a minute. I am not going to be the heavy around here. You can take care of these kids while I'm at work. I don't want to go home and hear all this. If they mess up while I'm around, I'll take care of it. If they mess up when you're around, you take care of it. I don't have to hear this when I walk in the door when I get home. Well, you knew that I know that we knew, you know now, we'll know soon, that once we heard those words of Mom, you're in charge, we realized we were in trouble. Dad, you can talk to. Mom, she was the disciplinarian. She was the one with the firm hand.
Carry a wooden spoon.
I hear some laughs here. I guess you understand. Anyway, too often the focus on that verse has been on discipline. And there are many horror stories out there of children whose parents, dads, oftentimes have erroneously focused upon that word discipline and have committed heinous acts of violence against their children. We read about them in the newspapers, we hear of them on the TV and our local news and national news sometimes. Parents do extremely terrible things, and sometimes resulting in the child's permanent suffering or death. And this, of course, is not biblical. Let me repeat that, and let's get this into everyone's head, here and out there in Facebook land. This is not God's idea of discipline. It's not His will. You have heard the verse, or supposedly the verse which says, "Spare the rod and spoil the child." Let me simply say this, that word, spoil the child, those words, spoil the child, are nowhere found in the Bible in connection with that verse. Let me explain. The phrase, spoil the child, actually was developed by a poet by the name of Samuel Butler back in the 17th century. And he devised a style of poetry called Hudibras. I think I pronounced that correctly. And in his one poem, he describes the passion of a young couple in an affair, and the poem goes like this. What medicine else can cure the fits of lovers when they lose their wits? Love is a boy, by poets styled, then spare the rod and spoil the child. Not in the Bible. Nothing to do with the discipline of children. I've looked at that and I've thought about that, and what could he possibly be saying? And I remembered something which might perhaps prove the point. When I was growing up in the town of Parsons, just down the road from here, at the corner of George Ave and Mill Street, there was an Italian lady who lived in an apartment above a house on the corner. And her name was Margaret, and she happened to like me. That was good. If you don't want to be liked by anybody, make sure you're liked by the Italian woman in your neighborhood. But there was a group of kids who were very vulgar, and they were underneath the window of her apartment, and they were just cursing and swearing. And Margaret was just getting fed up with that. She took a bucket of water, took it out, and poured it on them, and dampened their spirits. And so I think the poet is trying to say here that harsh discipline will dampen the spirits of people in an illicit relationship. And that has morphed into, if you beat the daylights out of your child, then you're going to correct defiant behavior. Not true. Psychologists tell us today, and I think I've learned from some experience with my older son, that yelling and being hard, I never beat him or anything, don't get me wrong, but, okay, come close, but I never did, and that just doesn't do it. Defiant behavior, when met with that kind of violence, only digs its heels in. If you want to deal with a defiant child, a better way than being harsh and by being physically abusive. And so, the Bible does not teach, if you spare the rod, you spoil the child. Get that out of your head. Get that out of your mind. Whenever you hear that, you have to realize that is nothing to do with what the Bible has to say. It's a poem. It's sarcasm. It's maybe humor. It's whatever. But it doesn't work. It's not to be applied in discipline. What I want to bring out, though, and this is my second point, is that compassion is a dad characteristic. Now, several years ago, I heard a father tell me of the tender care which he expressed towards his children. When they were hungry, he fed them. If their diapers were dirty or wet, he changed them. And he helped his wife nurture the children whenever he could. He was an older man. He was speaking to me as a young father, and he might have been trying to tell me that I needed to emulate those characteristics and those values. I sensed this up and I'm like, well, that's really cool. That's neat. He replied that his neighbors, who were fathers, thought he was odd. He was weak. He was sissy. Certainly not a manly man. Now, some guys may think that there's something odd about a nurturing father, as they did back when my older friend was a young father. Part of that reason might be because back when my older friend became a father, it was shortly after World War II had ended. And there's one thing which our military does: it teaches men how to be good soldiers. It doesn't necessarily teach them how to be good fathers. And many of the fathers back in the day were good soldiers. And the discipline that they received in this military training carried with them throughout their life. I remember my dad dealing with my older brother, who has since passed away, but if Glenn didn't fold his pants up on the creases and hang him over the chair at night, then Dad would go in and wake him up. And it could be 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. You know, when you're kids, you had to go to bed early because of school. And Dad said, get up and fold your pants correctly and put them over the chair. I know that was happened because he and I shared the same room at that time when we were younger. Now, as Dad moved on in his life and I came around, and he got a little more mellow. I never had to get up and fold my pants and put them on the chair. And I got a little smarter too. As I saw my brother getting disciplined, I figured, oh, that's I'll do it already and get to a good night's rest. And then by the time my younger brother Bruce came along, you have to realize there's 5 years between Glenn and me, 11 years between Bruce and myself. But by the time Bruce came along, he developed the attitude of alternate punishment. One of his favorite punishments was to put us on the rock pile. When they built the home which my wife and I now live in, the land was cleared, all the stumps and rocks and everything were placed in one corner. Over time, Dad burnt the stumps up. He sifted a rock out of the dirt, and there was this huge pile of rocks. And when we misbehaved, he would tell us to move the rock pile. And we couldn't go swimming until we moved the rock pile. And so he'd say, say it's up here, north end of the plot. Take it back here. Stop it. Can't go northeast. No, you're going back a lot. So we would move the rock pile back a lot. Time would go on, and one of us would mess up again, and gotta move that rock pile. Move it over here. That's up the front of it. Just move it from there. Can we just put it over here? No, it's gotta go over there. And so we would move the rock pile. Between my brothers being 11, one brother being 11 and being 15 years old, I think we covered the entire Compass Rose. That rock pile was moved everywhere. Matter of fact, we got smart. We started throwing across the woods into the rivers. So that every time the rock pile got smaller, instead of taking a week to move the pile, it only took us maybe 2 days. Dad never caught on to that. I don't know why, but he never caught on to that. And so we were all the better for it. So you see, friends, the harshness of that some people expected of dads has developed, has lessened, at least in my dad's case, over years. So, what is a dad supposed to be like? Well, Numbers chapter 11, verse 12, we get a insight into this. Now, you have heard of the Old Testament law in the Bible, how it was harsh, it was hard, thou shalt not, if thou do, the consequences come down, and all that. But we find here in the early part of the Bible an insight into the fact that God doesn't want dads to be hard-nosed people. And in Numbers chapter 11, we find a situation where Moses is irritated by thousands of complaining fellow Hebrews. They are tired of manna. Perhaps you can recall the story. God was providing them with manna. They're getting tired of having manna. I want something else to eat. And so they complain to Moses. And Moses is all discouraged and all frustrated and all full of anxiety. And he says to God, and here's the puncher, he says to him, have I conceived all these people? did I beget all these complainers? Should I carry them in my bosom as a nursing father beareth a sucking child unto the land which you have promised them? Now, when you read that, and hear that, as I read it, I was presented with a rather odd word picture. And I have thought of some way to politely and culturally proper explain this word picture. And I ran it by my wife twice, and no, you can't say that. No, you can't say that either. And I said, okay, all right. Maybe Moses isn't trying to be humorous here. He's trying to be sarcastic. Now, no matter how you explain it, the idea of a father nursing a child is just weird. And so I can't talk about that. But I can talk about what appears to be here a classic lose-lose situation. The child is not going to get food, and the father's not going to get any sleep. So this is a tough situation. It's a lose-lose situation. Dads just don't do that right at all. We're not equipped to do it. And so Moses is probably saying to God here, I am so frustrated with these people. I don't want anything to do with them. As a matter of fact, he tells God later in that chapter, he says, look at it, basically, paraphrase if you would, if I go to sleep tonight and I don't wake up tomorrow, I won't be hurt. My feelings won't be hurt. Please, take me out of this. I don't want anything to do with this. Moses did not want to be dealing as a disciplinarian from the position of a frustrated, anxious, angry father. And so God says to him, don't worry about it. I'm going to give you 70 helpers. So we see God developing here compassion for those who are frustrated over defiant behavior. And so Moses gets his 70 helpers. And what's more, God expresses more compassion, shows more compassion. He gives the people alternative food. Quail. So much quail, they were up to their necks in quail. Matter of fact, they said that they spread them all about the camp. I would wonder, that must have smelled bad, but apparently, as I researched, they were smoking them or salting them and preserving them. And, well, they had this nice meat, this quail. I've read that it tastes good. I don't know, I've never experienced it, but they say it tastes good. Now, you're a Bible scholar, you're going to say, yeah, John, but God really got upset with those people, and he terminated about 23,000 of them just a few verses down. And that's true, but it wasn't because they wanted quail, it was because they wanted to not trust him for their daily provision. They were trying to store up more than they needed on a daily basis. So God's saying today, look, I'm tired of it too. I'm not going to allow you people who present this bad example where you can't trust me for daily provision. And so those people who are bad examples to the others were eliminated from this situation. And so we find here again that the practice of God is that of compassion, of actually giving people some things that they want, that they pray for, that desire for. Now, the real clincher here is that the words in Hebrew used for nursing child is the word for what they call, I'm going to try to pronounce right, pedagogy. It's a type of teaching. And that is the same word which we find in the New Testament when the apostle in Galatians chapter 3:24 says, the law was our pedagogue, was our schoolmaster. Now we know that the law is severe. It's a tough schoolmaster. It points out every flaw. It punishes every fault. You have to look really hard to find a kind word in the law. It accuses of sin, it pronounces guilt on the sinner, and it curses and condemns the guilty. Moses is telling God, if this is how I must lead, as a frustrated, angry, harsh schoolmaster, I want nothing to do with it. And I say God explains, and God has compassion. And God shows that that's not what he wants. He wants dads to be compassionate. And it is a guy thing. You can do it. We can do it. I can do it. I have done it. And it hasn't hurt me to do it. So God wants us to be not frustrated, not dealing from the position of frustration and anger. He wants us to deal from an attitude of compassion. We are told that folly is bound up in the heart of a child in Proverbs 22:15. So there's got to be something else that we could do, and that is true. And that is found in Philippians 4:16. We are told to be anxious for nothing. I understand that Max Lucado, a famous writer, has a book out called Anxious for Nothing. I haven't read it, but I'm just going to mention it for those who like to read books. But I do know that the Bible tells me to be anxious for nothing. And teaching from a state of frustration and teaching from a state of compassion are two different things. And we are to teach without producing anxiety or conveying anxiety to our children. This is an area where many Christian dads, I feel, fall short. Let me explain. As a Christian, you understand what you want your final product to look like. You understand how a Christian is supposed to behave, what their values are supposed to be, how they're supposed to act, and how they're supposed to relate to people, and how they're supposed to live, and how their house is supposed to look, and how their children are supposed to dress, and all these kind of things. And you've come to those conclusions. And now here you have a child in your presence, and you have all this experience. Perhaps it's years of Sunday school, years of listening to sermons, years of your own Bible reading, years of others setting good examples. And here you are with this child, and you know what you want the product to look like, so you press for those characteristics. Take, for example, 3 chocolate chip cookies and an older son and a younger son. Make it 1 chocolate chip cookie and an older and a younger son. And the older son wants the cookie, and the younger son is crying because he doesn't have a cookie. And so you're looking to go, you should be sharing that cookie. Share that cookie with your brother. Give him a piece of that cookie. Don't you know that, as a Christian, you're thinking, you're supposed to share your cookies with people. And so, reluctantly, breaks off a piece of cookie, gives it to brother. Next time there's cookies on the table, now you remember to share those cookies. I want to make sure you don't hoard the cookies. Share them with your brother. And so you watch and you look. Sure enough, he eats the whole cookie. What's this kid not getting? I told him to share the cookie, and he hasn't done it. So you discipline him. Can't play Nintendo for 2 days. You didn't share your cookie. All right? So he doesn't play Nintendo for 2 days. Tears the room apart. Tortures the dog. Bothers his little brother. He would have been better off letting him play Nintendo already. But he hasn't got the idea. So then you think, what can I do? He's not getting the idea. He's not moving forward with this. So you create a scenario at home. Mom, let's do something together here. We're going to put cookies on the table. There's 4 of us, and there's 3 cookies. I grab one, you grab one, and you know what's going to happen now. The other kid grabs 2. You make sure he gets his cookies. And I say, oh, gee, honey, what's his name doesn't have a cookie? Well, here, I'll give it to him. Now you've showed by example. And then you wait. Next time there's cookies out, what happens? Well, lo and behold, he's not sharing the cookies yet. And so, what can you do? Well, you go to God in prayers. God, I've done my best. I've told this kid. I've showed this kid. I've tried to discipline this kid. And he's still not sharing the cookies. I'm frustrated. I don't know what to do. Then you think, well, place for God to work. And so we have that verse that says, "Vengeance is mine, I shall repay, saith the Lord." Give place for the wrath of God. Well, you give place for God's instruction to take place. I can remember this in my own family. Which one of my children wasn't doing what I thought they were doing, should be doing. I had a goal, I had a vision of what they're supposed to be like, and they weren't following through with it, and sure enough, discipline didn't work. Yelling didn't work. Denying them didn't work. Trying to get mom involved in it didn't work. I said, God, can't you do something? And over time, the desired behavior became a part of their life. So I didn't deal harshly. I mean, that doesn't work, right? I had tried that, but it doesn't work. And actually, probably wasn't even part of the game at that point. And so, over time, the behavior changed. And that's something which I think, as Christians, fathers, we need to be aware of. That we have an idea of what the final product is supposed to be. But sometimes we enforce adult behavior on children who haven't had the same experiences, haven't had the same time to think it through, haven't had the same conviction which follows from their own personal Bible reading and prayer, and we're expecting them to do these things, and it amounts to what we would think of as a house built on sandy soil. Their behavior system, their value system, is like the house in the scriptures which you read, which is built on sandy soil. And when the trials of life came, when the storms of life came, and they were no longer under mom and dad's influence, the house fell apart. Oftentimes this happens when children go off for the first time. Maybe when they go off to boot camp for service. Or maybe when they go off to college and are on their own. And they're faced with all types of decisions to be made, and they don't have the foundation of personal conviction to hold them up and to carry them through. And they fail. And sometimes as church members and church goers and as Christian parents, we say to ourselves, what went wrong? That's not the way they were raised. It's not what we expected of them. And the lesson to be learned there is that we have not given place for God to work in their life. Children are not always going to be obedient. They're going to try us. And at times, they're going to really, really frustrate us. But we need to keep in mind that when we allow God to work in the situation, oftentimes the behavior changes and the product will turn out the way we want it to turn out. So dads or dads-to-be or dads in charge of influence or have influence over children, whether it be a foster child or a grand or nephew or something like that, keep this in mind as you are working towards that final product. That working from the position of frustration and anxiety doesn't work. What is required is a more compassionate and understanding approach. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you should sometimes spank your child. But, generally speaking, physical punishment has minimal results, positive results. And lastly, keep in mind that God is involved in the work. Allow Him time and place to help your child develop the convictions which you hope they will have and which you know are going to lead for success in their life. And I believe that parenting will be a lot more positive experience, and you'll find your children to be giving you the best dad card on this day of the year. Heavenly Father, we ask that your hand will be upon us and guide and direct us in our parenting and our relationships with our children. Pray that you give us wisdom and help us to hone the skills, to hone the tools which you give us in your word as we guide and direct young lives. In Jesus' name, amen. Our concluding hymn is hymn number